somber mood.
Sorry.
Oh, just talking about, yes, just talking about fraud. Ooh. I am going to talk about fraud, but look, I put a rainbow. So there's a ray of light in the future and what's coming. So I'm talking about the threat of fraud on messaging in how it is challenging CPaaS. So this is Mobilesquared. I'm sure most of you are familiar with us. Number one provider for business messaging intelligence in the world. These are a list of some of our clients, a lot of our clients, and it's growing, not growing fast enough. First, I'm going to start with a recap. I think it's really important to look at where we were a year ago and the view of where we were looking a year ago of what the future held for us. But obviously, in that year, a hell of a lot's changed. So these are our CPaaS forecasts from 12 months ago or so, just over 12 months ago. So we expected about 30 billion to be spent on CPaaS. And again, the methodology was more also looking at the revenues of CPaaS providers as well. So we kind of looked at that, worked our way back, and that's where we created the number. And then our forecast was based on lots of growth. And by 2026, we're expecting the market to be worth over $52 billion. As you can see, in terms of growth over that period, it's 212%. CAGR was 21%. Everything was looking good, really strong. So between 2020 and 2022, the CAGR for that period was about 32.6%. Incredible. And obviously a lot of that was driven by mergers and acquisitions. So, maybe that kind of set a false precedent for what we're expecting over the forecast period. Maybe it didn't. But again, if you then look at what the CAGR was for the remainder of the forecast period, it dropped to 15.4%. Again, it's still very high, very aggressive, but very positive. And that was kind of where we were a year ago, looking at all the various channels that we include within CPaaS. These are the various channels. So there are 14 that we look at. And again, this is based on research that we did for the CPaaS report. And we basically identified primary channels, secondary channels. So on the left, the top 5 channels that aggregators are expecting to use as part of their CPaaS offering will be SMS, WhatsApp, voice, RCS, and email. And by 2025, they expect SMS, RCS, and voice. Sorry, I put it in the wrong one. 3. Smooth. Should be WhatsApp. So in actual fact, the top 3 are messaging. So I'll blame the designer. Just me. Anyway, so that's I think that's a really strong view of where we're going with omnichannel. And I won't go into the background of it, but that's kind of where we were. Last year, we also did some research for XConnect. We're repeating that research, or we have, and I will talk about that on a panel with Tim tomorrow. And we'll go into a lot more detail. But again, this is kind of setting the scene really nicely. So of the industry survey that we did last year with XConnect, and again, based on the numbers, it kind of gave the impression from the industry that fraud would account for about 5% of total CPaaS revenues. And again, based on our numbers, that would be just over about $1.4 billion in 2023, going up to about $1.35 billion by 2026. From the research, we also asked for industry, what do they believe are the most secure channels? And at the top, have we got a lighter? No. Number 1, SMS, which is really interesting. Second with voice, third RCS, fourth WhatsApp. And interestingly, email, which is all the way over there, was about joint 10th in terms of security. So again, this was the view last year, which I think is really interesting because again, what we're talking about today and what we've been talking about for the last couple of months is obviously a lot of the fraud around SMS. But in actual fact, last year it was viewed as the most secure, and we'll give you the results of this year's research tomorrow, where we'll also tell you what's the most secure channel according to industry. This, I think, is the most salient slide that I'm showing today. This is based on last year's research and one data point from this year's research. So we asked, do you expect the percent of your total annual revenue susceptible to revenue leakage to increase or decrease in 3 years' time? So based on where the industry was last year, where their views were, they're expecting that the revenue leakage to drop, as you can see, by 3.58%. 12 months have passed. There's a 7.7 percentage point swing towards the negative effectively, because they now expect a 3.57 increase in revenue loss or susceptible to fraud. So again, 12 months, there's been a big shift in industry in terms of where we are and how they view fraud. So what does that mean? So these are a work in progress. These are our CPaaS forecasts up to 2027. They are fairly different from where they were last year for two very notable reasons. First is this bottom one here, blue, SMS. And again, I'll come on to that in the next couple of slides. But what you can see is that where we had kind of linear growth in our forecast for CPaaS for last year, you can see it's almost becoming a bit of a ski slope now. So things have slightly changed. We're expecting a bit of a dip. And the reasons for that are primarily because of what's happening with SMS and also the overall landscape when it comes to CPaaS and growth. But as you can see, what we're expecting is still similar kind of CAGR between 2022 and 2027 compared to what we had for our forecast last year. But what's quite interesting is if we just do the CAGR up to 2026, that figure drops to about 12%. So the market's changing. The market is kind of almost slowing over the next couple of years. And the reason why we expect it to accelerate is the green, and that's primarily because of WhatsApp. You can see a sliver below that, which is RCS. And we're still updating our forecast for RCS, and there's some very encouraging signs with RCS, which I'll come on to in a minute. But again, I think what I want to do is just focus a few slides on what's happening with SMS, because as you can see, SMS is the platform for CPaaS. And in actual fact, with all the research that we've done, out of every business or enterprise that uses on the channel, the first channel that they typically use is SMS. So again, that's key. And again, these are the same kind of figures, but just shown in an area chart, and it kind of shows what's happening with SMS. You can see it accounted for over 70% of revenues at the start of 2020. It's dropping to about 30% of overall CPaaS spend by 2027. WhatsApp, as you can see, is kind of making that big swing, big shift. But you can also see that there's growth here for email, voice, and in-app push. And again, that's partly because of what's happening with SMS. There's a lot of spend that's shifting into these other channels. So this basically shows you the CPaaS percentage of from the SMS's contribution in terms of spend. And as I mentioned, it's about 32% by 2027. But I think the key point here is when we looked at forecast last year, it was still 50% of total CPaaS spend. For 2026, that's now dropped to 41%. So it's dropping. So, you know, from what we're seeing, because of what's happening in SMS around market conditions, which I'll come on to in a second, that is obviously having an impact in terms of overall view of CPaaS. So this is our A to P SMS pricing impact report, Aspire. I'm sure many of you have seen this, but so I'll just go through it very quickly. This is where we look at four things. We look at the percentage increase in international termination rates. This was from 2Q. We're about to release our 3Q report. We look at various fraud traffic based on our numbers that we have for SMS. We look at whether the operator has a firewall and if there's an exclusivity agreement in there. We've created a model. We've got a nice little formula. And on the back of that, we then get a figure. And on that figure, we then determine whether an operator is high risk, medium risk, low risk, or no risk. As I've said before, we don't have we're not brave enough to publish the mobile operator thing, but what we do is give you a country view. And what this shows, in actual fact, 11% of all markets we would consider as medium risk or high risk right now. Again, when we do our 3Q in the next week or so, we'll see how the market's changed as a result of pricing. And again, this is a slide from earlier this year, so I won't go into it, but it just shows these are all the increases. So 87 markets out of the 200 we track have had quite significant price increases over that time. So on the research that we've been doing all year around SMS, and also, as Dario mentioned, the report into AIT and also the changes in the international termination rates, one figure that keeps coming up is 10 cents. And that's typically a view that a lot of people are saying to me and us in terms of what it should be the ceiling for an A2P SMS. So what this chart shows is where there's red, there's one operator, a minimum of one operator in that market that has a rate, an international termination rate, in excess of 10 cents. So as you can see, if you want to sound and count, there are 83 markets there. And the key point here is where that rate is high, you're more than likely to get an increase. The probability is higher to get an increase in an escalation of fraud. So at the moment, there's 83 markets that could be considered medium to high risk. And that's a concern. Because this is what's happening. And again, these are our forecasts from early in the year. And hang on, I'm going to play around with something. Here we go. So what we've heard in the last couple of months or so is that there's been a massive dip in international traffic as a result of the very high international termination rates in lots of markets. We're also hearing that it's now having an impact on domestic. So this is, again, playing around with some numbers that we have, just to show the impact that a lot of aggregators are telling us that in certain markets, they're seeing drops of 10, 20, 30, 40, 50% in traffic. A lot of that has happened in the last quarter. So just playing around with some numbers, this is kind of the worst case scenario here on international traffic. You can see there's a big drop and there's a CAGR of minus 15%. So that's kind of what's happening with the market. Now, if we just come back to this side, again, this is something I've been banging on about all year, but it's really important because what's happening with international termination rates is that the industry is getting this short-term gain, it's getting this spike in revenues, but long-term, it's damaging. It's really damaging. And over, we've created these two models, one based on our forecasts published in June, and we also at the time did an alternative view based on all of our modeling prior to the middle of 2021 when the international termination rates increased. And you can see that the pink purple one is the alternative view, and the blue was, which is now quite outdated given what's happened, our actual Mobilesquared forecast. But over that forecast, hang on, I'm on a roll. Over that period, because we're chasing these short-term gains, these short-term profits, the long-term picture is actually going to cost the industry $14.4 billion. That's a lot. If you think about it, that's almost half of the revenues from SMS last year. What else did I miss? So coming back. So again, these are out of date now because we've got to update our figures based on what's happened over the last few months, and we're in the process of doing that. But this is the view from earlier, and we see this is the actual SMS traffic, and then the purple and the green is lost to other channels. So as you can see, we've got green, that's lost to WhatsApp. So by 2027, probably 1 trillion or so messages that should have been on SMS have now migrated onto WhatsApp Business. Trillion. That's almost, that's close to half of what's going on here. So that's massive. And that's what we're doing right now. This is the long-term future of SMS and CPaaS, bringing it back to CPaaS omnichannel, that we're actually jeopardizing because it has a wider implication. So again, what we're also seeing as a result of these high rates is that SMS is being offloaded via WhatsApp and RCS and flash calls. We're starting to see, now Viber and Telegram and lots of other kind of channels are being used to kind of offset this traffic. And if we don't do something as an industry to change these international termination rates, this is what we're looking at. So this is serious, really serious. So back to the point I was to talk about. So what we're seeing is this shift. So whereas SMS is still the platform for CPaaS, we're now starting to see an uplift in traffic for email in particular, for in-app push notifications, and obviously for WhatsApp. And we're actually starting to see, and again, we haven't really forecasted this properly yet, so we still need to add it in, a bigger increase for RCS. So RCS is happening. But nothing's actually changed in terms of our overall outlook, in terms of what does this mean over our forecast period. So the big four for SMS are, for CPaaS, are SMS, email, WhatsApp, and voice. And I think the key point I want to make here is you can see the trajectory has obviously dipped for SMS, the blue at the bottom, it's dropping, but we do expect it to level out. And the reason we expect it to level out is because there's no better channel for doing what it does than SMS. That's the thing. And whilst, okay, you've got the hyperscalers that are looking to use other channels, they're very concerned about the high prices. When they look at trying to do exclusive deals with mobile operators, these are 5-year deals. So that tells you that in 5 years' time, they're still going to be using SMS. So in actual fact, regardless of what's happening now, SMS isn't going away. So it's still the platform, but we still need to clean it up a lot because that will actually be the trajectory on which other channels can enjoy growth. So the big four, we expect to account for about 91.5% of all spend by 2027. The messageverse, we love the messageverse. That's all things messaging. And again, obviously dominated by SMS in 2020. There's a dip because of what's happening with SMS and obviously the slower adoption of rich messaging in 2023. But as you can see, certainly driven by WhatsApp over the rest of the forecast period, there's going to be a strong rise. And by 2027, we expect messaging to account for 70% of spend in CPaaS. Now, what's important here is over this forecast period, WhatsApp has a CAGR of about 140%. Second after that is RCS. We've got, and again, we're still changing these, but it's, at the moment, we've got that at about 110%. All other channels are significantly low. We've even got Apple at about 70%, but that's primarily because we expect them to start doing something in a few years' time around business messaging. As I've mentioned Apple, I'll just say something on Apple because we keep getting asked about Apple. So obviously Apple coming out with mentioning that they're going to support RCS is probably the best bit of publicity that RCS has ever had. In all honesty, and it's a bit like, I think, if you're familiar with Elf, the movie, it's my favorite Christmas movie. It's Elf Saves Christmas in New York, and it's all about Santa's sleigh. There's no spirit of Christmas, therefore the sleigh's power motor doesn't work, and therefore Santa's struggling to obviously distribute kids, mostly in New York, because obviously that's all that happens. The world's in New York, but the spirit of Christmas grows and grows and grows. People start singing, they start singing carols, the spirit of Christmas goes. Santa's sleigh works. Now, I think what we're seeing with RCS is every time brands see Apple and RCS together in one sentence, the spirit of RCS grows within brands. And I think what we're going to see is an acceleration in RCS. At the moment, in terms of spend, we'd probably say it's about 4 years behind. But what we're seeing in terms of traffic from RCS, certainly this year, is that in some markets is catching up with WhatsApp. In actual fact, WhatsApp isn't actually that big right now. It's just got this perception it's significantly bigger than probably what it is. But where it's going, obviously, there's a much clearer trajectory, I think, at the moment with WhatsApp. But if we remove WhatsApp, what does CPaaS look like? Well, it looks like this. In actual fact, it would have a CAGR of 6.3% over our forecast period, and spend would go from 2022 at about 30 billion up to about 40 billion. So again, WhatsApp right now is almost replacing the reliance that CPaaS has on SMS. The future of CPaaS right now and the growth, as we see it right now, is going to come from WhatsApp. In actual fact, looking at the CAGR, the supporting role for that will be RCS. So if we looked at this maybe to 2030, the picture would probably be quite different. And again, the contribution that the messageverse would have to overall CPaaS spend would probably be higher than 70%. So what does that mean? So if we look at spend on CPaaS from a non-interactive and interactive standpoint, so interactive is where you've got the opportunity of having a two-way communication. So right now, based on our forecasts, we expect that the amount of spend by a brand is about 20% of their spend goes on interactive channels. So that could be WhatsApp, RCS, and other interactive channels I can't think of, voice, etc. But then that means 80% of their spend is not interactive. It's kind of one way. And again, I've been saying this for a year, but this is probably where we are as an industry. We're growing. We're trying to educate consumers about having that interaction with brands. It's all very new. And again, Steve was saying from NetNumber, the mobile phone, it's the personal number, it's a personal device, but it's also the way that we as consumers control our lives and communicate, not only with friends and family, but we're starting to use that to communicate with brands as well. But it's a slow picture, it's a slow journey, but we're getting there. And by the end of 2027, we expect half of that, the spend from a brand, to be over interactive channels. So it's coming, but I think we've just got to be patient. And again, a lot of that will be, as we've seen, from WhatsApp. So if we remove WhatsApp, it will remain at about 20%. But maybe WhatsApp could be the channel that educates consumers and kind of how they interact with brands. And again, Steve's touched on this about other industries. This is digital ad fraud. This is from a report from Czech. And it's saying that of all digital ad spend, brands are wasting 35.7 billion a year. So this was, I think, for 2022. That's what they like. Admittedly, it's a $600 billion industry, but brands are losing that much in fraud. So when we look at what we're losing at an industry, we've got the CPaaS figures, again, from the research from Exconnect, but we also got our own forecasts around SMS. This is where we are. This would be total SMS fraud. So this is everything. So if you assume that all grey from an operator's perspective is fraud, plus all of the AIT fraud, etc., that's about 6.6 billion or so. And that's probably about 18% of total spend for SMS this year. But if we just look at, from our perspective, harmful spend, because we don't think all grey route traffic is dangerous or harmful, a lot of it is just used to kind of get these blended rates down, then SMS it's about 10% total spend. So in actual fact, SMS is a pretty clean channel, really clean. And I think at the moment we're very worried about the amount of fraud that we're seeing on it, but that's just because it's growing, because more and more spend is coming. That's going to attract more and more bad actors. That's just what happens in the world of marketing, advertising. That's really what we're seeing. So in actual fact, I don't think we need to worry. Long-term picture will be good. It's just trying to get through this ripple right now. And that's it. Thank you very much.
I had a bit of a mic drop moments there with the mic earlier, so just picked it up. Any questions for Nick? Okay, we got some over here. Susan will pass you the mic. Can you say your name and your company, please?
Yes, John Coleman, that number. Quick question, and in your research, anything come up about WeChat or other providers other than RCS? I didn't see anything in there.
No, we're not there yet. At the moment, we focus primarily on SMS, RCS, WhatsApp. We're starting to look at Viber, Facebook Messenger. But at the moment, we kind of lump like WeChat, etc., as kind of OTT, other kind of messaging platforms. So for us, it's not kind of a primary part of our research.
Okay, thank you.
We got a few more. We go Ira over there.
Ira calling from MMB Smart. Now that Apple has saved the spirit of RCS, the big question, I guess, in the room that we're all going to be asking is they specifically said that we're supporting RCS and not RBM, basically the support that came out. What does that mean? You mentioned that you assume that Apple will make a play into business messaging at some point. What is the possibility that will be RBM aligned, or will they stay their separate path?
I think from that one, it probably comes down to the verification process, personally, in terms of what will that mean. So would Google be happy to have a brand that's verified by Apple appearing on an Android device?
Okay, so,
No, go on. No, sorry, Susan. Go on. You come here. And vice versa. Would Apple want the Google tick verified? I don't know. I think that's the first big hurdle that you need to get over from brands. But I mean, I think that just by Apple coming out and saying it's going to support RCS is very strong, a really strong announcement. I think it's a carefully worded statement, to be honest. But again, just by having having Apple and RCS from an Apple statement in one paragraph, I think it's very strong for RCS. I think it sends the right signal to brands. But from an RBM perspective, what does that mean? At the moment, I've got no idea, to be honest. I mean, if it starts the kind of the interconnection between, decent quality of messages and the richness between iOS and Android, that can only be a good thing. But from a business perspective, to be honest, Apple have got to get their business messaging right. I think they've got it wrong anyway. And they're really flagging with Apple Messages for Business. It's not really taking off. So I think they've got that wrong. And they need to address that. If they address that, in the same way, I think WhatsApp, at the moment, they followed the WhatsApp model, trying to do the inbound customer care route, and that's what Apple have done. But, I think the regulations and guidelines that they put on it have been too restrictive for brands. And so brands aren't really kind of adopting it. That's the problem. They've got to look at that. But I think they will do. They have to at some point, because everyone else is doing stuff. And I'm sure they won't want to be left behind.
This is Inderpal from Dargo. So, Nick, you mentioned there are 87 countries where there's at least one carrier that has a SMS price of more than 10 cents for international termination.
Do you want me to name them? Do you want me to name them?
No. How many of the countries are there that have a separate international versus domestic price difference? But it's not all the countries. You have a map of that with the WhatsApp transfer happening.
That's a good question.
Things will be changed.
We can do it. I haven't done it, but we can do it. And if I'm honest, I don't know. I'd have to look at it. I guess what we're looking at the moment, the focus is on the high rates, not where the rates have either stayed the same or the rates are the same as domestic. So interesting. I will add that to the next report. So that's thanks very much. We know that 90% of operators increased their international rate between 2021 and 1Q 2023. So 10% is going to be less than 10% that will have the same rate between domestic and international. So that's kind of the starting point. So it'll be less than 10%.
Okay, we have one in the back from Gene for BTS.
Hi, Nick. Gene Pradas, BTS. Thanks again for the presentation and the data. 2 points. First of all, as you mentioned about fraud increasing, MNOs continue to raise prices. But what do you think is the rationale, knowing that the difference between the SMS and the voice continues to be higher and just need room for fraud? And the second point is, you had a couple of charts show emails. What do you think the impact of email is going to be moving forward?
It comes down to price. And obviously that's the first part of your question. So what is the rationale behind the price? There's lots, there's number. So a number of operators believe that A2P SMS is going to follow the trajectory of P2P SMS and therefore die. And on the back of that, they're just kind of trying to extract as much revenue as they can from a dying market. So again, I think there's an educational piece there required for a lot of operators around the world, so that they can understand that in actual fact, if we've been saying 8.5% of businesses use SMS, so there's still massive organic growth there. It's just how do we tap into that? So there's that opportunity. I think there's a Me Too scenario as well. So through group, if one opco raises the price, then another opco will have a conversation. Oh, how's that going? And they'll go after a few months. It's going pretty well. Yeah. Okay, we'll do that as well. And then the other opco will then increase their price. And so gradually throughout a group, you could see a lot of operators increasing their price, regardless of the impact that it has, in the kind of price elasticity around that and the impact. We're now starting to feel that impact in a lot of markets. There are some markets we've been told where, there has been a drop in traffic of 50% in the last 3 or 4 months. So, that's worrying, really worrying. And that's purely down to price. And on the back of the high price, you're then getting new kinds of fraud. And that's where the AIT, AGT comes in. And also, you've also got more grey routes, because brands want to find blended routes, trying to get those prices down. So grey routes have gone up as well. So the trajectory on grey routes has probably gone back several years in terms of where it's going versus where it should be going right now. So again, it's having a massive impact across all of the industry. And in doing that, I've completely forgotten the second part of your question. Or have I answered it? What's the second part? Email. Well, again, this is the interesting part when it comes to price with SMS, because when you talk to brands and enterprise, they always lump SMS, they see it as a broadcast channel. And obviously the other broadcast channels are email and in-app. And then you look at the pricing, the average cost of a price. I know its pricing model is different. If you try and work out what the average price is for an email, it's normally something like 0.0005, for example. And it's a similar pricing model for in-app. So a lot of brands will look at that and say, actually, they viewed SMS as a premium channel when it's 3 cents to send a message a couple of years ago. Now, when you've got 25, 30 cents in some markets, it's just gone off the chart. So again, so with email, because it's so cheap, although you're going to see an uplift, it won't have a big impact because the overall spend of email, it's, at the moment, it's about $10 billion industry globally from a business email perspective. So, the uplift is there in traffic, but in spend, it won't be that great because it's so cheap.
Nick, we have 2 more in the room, and then we have 1 online, and we've plenty of time. So, yeah.
Hi, my name is Marco from Mesente.
Hello.
Thanks for the presentation. And the question is about passkey. And are you monitoring how that will change the international OTP traffic?
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
Have you been monitoring the passkey technology? And how does that change the international OTP traffic?
We're looking at that. So it could change it quite dramatically, but it's a question of when. But at the moment, I'm not in a position to give you anything, I'm afraid. But yeah, we are looking at it, that and the whole kind of broader digital identity piece.
Hi, it's Ellie Katz from XConnect. Actually, it's a semi-similar question, so I'm not sure if we're going to have the same answer. But the various other methodologies for multi-factor authentication, such as silent auth, any thoughts yet on whether areas like this and passkey in a way is an alternative authentication? Is this all part of that kind of challenge to the SMS domination?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, absolutely. Because if you look at it from, say, the one-time password perspective, that accounts for about 89% of all international traffic. And if brands are being forced to pay upwards of 10 cents to deliver something, well, like I said, James's head move. Upwards of over 10 cents versus something that they were paying 3 cents a couple of years ago for the same service, then obviously it's going to force brands into looking at other alternatives. Are they as strong? That's the issue right now. And I don't think they are. And again, it comes back to the fact that you've got the likes of the hyperscalers looking to do these 5-year fixed term or fixed rate deals that suggest they still need that kind of, it's still the kind of the comfort zone, the buffer zone is SMS for the time being. So it could be in 5 years' time, everything will shift away from SMS because there will be these alternatives. It could be via an authenticator app, it could be passkey, it could be whatever. So, I mean, it's coming. It's just a case of when and how fast. We're still working that out.
Perfect. 1 more online from Anonymous. And they ask...
sounds like a horror movie.
If you believe that SMS will rise again over other channels after some time of experiencing other channels and their difficulties.
Rise again? No, I said recover, I think. Maybe. And I think it will because for the time being, because, the companies are still trying to work out what the alternatives are and how powerful they are. And at the moment, nothing has the effectiveness and ubiquity of SMS. And even, we don't mention the white paper with MEF, where we talk to a lot of the hyperscalers. And the first thing that they always say is that messaging is, or SMS is and should be, the best channel for what it is. And it should be, but it's not. It's being tarnished by, obviously, all the market conditions and all the practices that are being employed by some companies. So, it's still the best channel. It's whether that level of abuse that's on it right now can be kind of ridden over the long term. I think it can. I think it will recover for most big brands, but some will move away and spend money elsewhere. It's inevitable, but it's not the death of SMS.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you so much, Nick. I think we're very hard on ourselves as an industry, and we don't really sell SMS as sexy as it should be, because it has these really high read rates and people read SMSs really, really quickly, more so than many other channels. So I'd like to thank the chief messageologist once again. We are going on a break now, a quick coffee break, and we're back here at 11:30 sharp to discuss voice. So please, a round of applause for Nick.
Thank you.